Welcome to Ocean Rock Stars with Tom Neymat. Today I have a very special guest, Camille Cox. Camille's worked with us for a number of years in a lot of different positions. Right now she's shining as Director of Admissions, and she's really kind of the liaison between the family or the clients who are looking for treatment, looking for help, and connecting them with the right program. I'll let her talk a little bit about her own story and how she got into this field and kind of what it looks like on a day-to-day basis. One of the key takeaways from today, we want to learn more about frequently asked questions from both families and clients who are looking to get help, whether it's inpatient, residential programming, detoxification, or if they're looking for outpatient or even sober living. So there's a lot of questions that families have, a lot of clients have questions, really learning more about the process. And that way you can have as much information as you can about how to navigate. A lot of times, as you know, Camille, people don't have the best idea of where they're going or how they're going to get there. There's all these websites, but it's until they talk to somebody like you who can walk them through the steps and walk them through what that 30, 60, 90 day or what that outpatient program would look like. With the case of Ocean Rock Recovery, we have our virtual program and how to integrate into that. We have a whole team of people that help with that. So I'm really excited about talking to you and first really kind of learning a little bit about your story. Camille has a fascinating story, and I don't think we can get into all of it, but really kind of getting to the highlights and the struggle that you went through and how you dragged yourself out of that, and then how you inspire other people to do that. I can tell you that Camille is one of the inspirations for a lot of our both staff and clients, and she's one of my favorite people as well. So without any further ado, Camille Cox, say hello.
Hello. Okay, so I'll just start out with a little bit about my story. I was born in Texas, the youngest of three, born into a alcoholic family. My dad was an active alcoholic when I was born up until about the age of 7. And then he got sober. So I always remember, like, as a little kid going to these meetings, and back then it was like you would walk into these big rooms and you literally couldn't see the other side of the room because it was smoky, like people were just drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes, trying not to drink, basically. Right. So in my mind, like, as a little kid, like, observing all this, I don't really know what I thought back then, but I did know from a very young age that there was a solution to people that had the problem for alcoholism and drug addiction. So that did not deter me from dabbling myself. I learned also, my older brother struggled, Chris struggled. By the time I could really start remembering, maybe 10 or 11 years old, and his struggles and him starting to go to treatment. And then by this time my dad was going back to school to get his counselor degree. So, and I can always remember my mom specifically saying, you have the characteristics of an alcoholic. And I always then I was like, gosh, that's kind of rude, but she
just labeling you like that.
Yeah, just labeling me like that. But it was true. Like, everything I did to excess.
Right.
And she had seen those characteristics in my dad and then my brother and then in myself. So, like, at a very early age, I was kind of already diagnosed as somebody that had an addictive personality. So, and then I remember Chris went to treatment. We lived in a pretty country, kind of out in the middle of the woods type situation. And I remember starting to dabble a little bit in alcohol and drugs, and doing it to where I would just drink, and then throw up, and then be up and ready to drink again, And so needless to say, I found my way into treatment. My parents put me in treatment at a very young age. And then I got out. I was there for a long time, 14 months.
Wow. How old were you in then?
14.
Okay. So in a teen adolescent program.
And so got out, kind of stayed scared straight for a little bit. And then it was after that that I really started like having consequences. Like at 14, like what consequences? You know, like I said, I would like drink and throw up and then go home and go to sleep in my bed, you know, but, and like my mom and dad being mad at me, stuff like that. But like the legal consequences and the, you know, the things that were kind of scary, like waking up and not knowing how I got there and like going to jail for like public intoxication, and just the consequences started happening around 16 or 17. But again, I knew there was a better way. I had seen my dad go to AA and get sober. My brother at this point was sober. I think he was either moved out here or close to being moved out here. And so I knew that there was a solution to my problem. So anyway, after that, I just was kind of running and gunning for a long time. I had a couple of kids. I got married and divorced, and the consequences, the yets just kept happening. Like, I'm never gonna, you know, be homeless. I'm never gonna lose custody of my kids. I'm never gonna get divorced. I'm never gonna go to jail. I'm never gonna go to prison. I'm never gonna be without my family. And every single thing that I said would never happen happened.
You lost everything.
I lost everything. Yeah. So, and repeatedly, over and over and over, lost everything. So I think by the time I was really beat down at 37 years old was, which interestingly enough, tomorrow marks 8 years of the last time I got out of jail.
Oh.
So not my sobriety date, but the last time I actually booked out of jail, which is kind of a significant thing for me because that was just part of my life for so long, you know. I just
when you were around 29. Oh no, yeah.
Well, from the time I was 17 years old into 37, I was just in and out.
Right, just different things, all based on drug addiction or alcoholism. So
I got out of jail and then went on a pretty sick run, as we like to call it, for the next 3.5 weeks, and then surrendered. And I called my brother that had offered me some help, and I, you know, kind of told him I was too busy to get help type thing. And I came to California, and it was like the hardest, scariest, best decision I ever made, you know.
I mean, what, because you went through that cycle, right? In and out, and whether it was in jail or in active addiction, active alcoholism. What was it that ended that cycle for you? I mean, you know, what did you do differently, or what was the circumstances around this change?
You know, I wonder that too. I'm always fascinated by the why.
Right.
You know, like you're in this lifestyle, and then what is the thing that happens that makes you go, okay, no more? And I think for me, it was, you know, I did not have a soft landing anymore. My parents were done with me. My kids were, I mean, my daughter had not been in my life for a long time, but my son was done with me. My siblings were done with me. I didn't have, you know, everybody around me was just didn't really care if I lived or died, you know. So I think the why for me was everybody getting out of the way of me hitting a terrible bottom, you know, and no more car rides, no more, you know, $20 for food, none of that. Like, no more phone calls, basically. You know, nobody wanted to talk to me or be around me. And so I think that at that moment, like, in, you know, as somebody that suffers from addiction, like, it's easy to say in it, like, well, nobody cares, and, you know, everybody's just treating me terribly, and poor me. But it's like, in reality, everybody that cared about me was getting out of the way of me actually hitting a bottom and wanting help.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's one of the biggest ironies in, people who have to deal with addiction and have that addictive mindset. And it's the fact that the more the people around them do to try to help them, the more that person takes advantage of it, right? Like every dollar, every car ride, like you said, anything that anyone was trying to do to help you get better, you were taking advantage and manipulating. And when they stopped doing that, then you had no more, you had no more options, right? And then that's when you started your path to sustainable recovery, right? So then what did you do moving forward when you hit that rock bottom and you felt like you were in a place where it was just so dark and so lonely? How did you mentally drag yourself out of that? Because I think that's another pivotal moment where some people can't drag themselves out of that. But I think if we all learn a little bit about what enabled you to do that and kind of drag yourself out of that situation when you were so isolated, right? Tell us a little bit more about that.
So, when I first got to California in February of 2016, and I've said this before, I don't really know if I wholeheartedly wanted to change or get sober. I just wanted out of that just terrible, miserable, we have a saying in AA that is incomprehensible demoralization. And it talks about how people like us have that incomprehensible demoralization. And that is like the adjectives that explain my life for 20 something years,
Right.
So I just wanted to be away and to feel better and to get maybe get some people like talking to me again and stuff like that. But so, I was really, really hateful and mean and rude and like, a lot of people are when they get to treatment for the first 2.5 weeks. And every time I would threaten to leave and they would call my brother. And for whatever reason, one day, what he said stuck with me and the game changed from there on out. And he said, "Of course, Camille, you're not happy. Of course you're miserable. Of course you feel terrible. Of course you're angry. You just landed in a place and all your coping skills are taken away from you and now you just have yourself. So it really doesn't matter how you feel right now. It's what you do." Mm-hmm. And that clicked with me in my head. And I started listening to the people around me and it sounds so trivial, but doing little things like calling my sponsor every day and making my bed and listening to the people around that were trying to give me direction. And, pretty soon it was 3 weeks sober, then it was 30 days sober. And I always say too, those little chips are my biggest accomplishments because I couldn't go 30 minutes without a substance, much less 30 days,
Right.
So really just the perception of me, yes, this is going to suck for a minute, but I need to do some little things, take some direction with the people around me. And then things started getting really good pretty quickly. 30 days in, I was already my mom was talking to me again and my sister. Right. And little things. And then, I started getting the promises of what getting sober promises to people. So,
I think it's so fascinating. Like you were saying, after that 30 days, that 30 days was so important because it was day one and, the first week and then the second week. And you kind of start adding those days up. And then now you're at a month. And, in general, that doesn't seem like a long time. But for somebody who, like you said, couldn't even stand being not under the influence for more than half an hour, right? For you to actually do that, it's such a accomplishment and it was such a path in the right direction. But then I think one thing you said that really resonates, and I see that a lot with the clients and with family members, is that, they started talking to you again. And I think that's, when they stop talking to you, a lot of times you talk to a lot of people and they say, well, They were so resentful of that. And you're kind of like, well, I can't believe these people abandoned me when I needed them, right? But ultimately, they didn't abandon you because that wasn't you. And I think that's what it takes some time for somebody to recognize. And then it's really when they do have this sobriety and they can look back with a clear mind, they see that, no, the people did not abandon me. I abandoned myself, and that wasn't me. Like, how can you connect with that person when that person is just so destructive and uses every single opportunity to do drugs or drink or whatever it is that helps them get through that, where they're shutting everybody else out, right? So ultimately, when you started reconnecting with your family, and you started getting, let's say, 30 days sober, and you started kind of listening and paying attention to the advice that you were getting all along that you just didn't listen to, right? So it's not like you were learning or hearing anything new. And I think that's another critical point that I really want you to talk about and kind of talk to families about, is it's not necessarily that there's there's anything, something new that somebody's going to hear at a meeting, or maybe they've been in treatment before and there's another group. And, a lot of it is similar. It's just, on one hand, some programs are better than others. And I think we have a great program, and that's important. But it's also the readiness and willingness of the addict and the client who has, for whatever reason, put themselves in a position where they're willing to absorb and consume this information and be part of something, right? Because as far as you're alone, or that you're, the people you're hanging out with, because I'm sure, you went to jail, right? Like, you were not hanging out with the best people, right?
No.
The choice of people that you thought were the people that were your family and your friends were just people that were taking advantage of you for either financial or social or whatever, somebody else to do drugs with or whatever, right? And so it's one thing to replace your core family with these group of people who really could give a shit about you. Mm-hmm. They don't give a shit about themselves in that moment, to then overcome that. And now you're surrounded with people who are in sobriety, who are people who may be therapists, who are helping you, who now you're listening to your brother, who I'm sure for 37 years, he's given you advice. And finally, something happened at that moment where you listened. And so I really wanted you to kind of transition from sharing that experience and transitioning to now the role that you have, which is showing people, whether it's families or clients, hey, this is what it's going to look like, and helping them kind of get through that initial barrier. Because I know one of the most frequent things that you always tell me, and that our admissions and business development team kind of tell us, and the outreach team, is that no matter how many times you guys answer questions or how many times you try to get somebody to come into treatment, or whether it's to our facility or somewhere else, that resistance that they have is either they don't want to come in, or, hey, we'll just come for, a couple of days detox and we're good. We're going to go back out, right? And it's the commitment for somebody not only to come in, but to stay and to be away from the substance for long enough where their brain can actually start repairing itself and where they can actually get the long-term help. So what I'd like to kind of focus the rest of the podcast on is going over that frequently asked questions, going over how do you take somebody who's unwilling to willing, and then when they want to leave, because everyone wants to leave the first couple of weeks. I haven't seen anybody who actually wants to stay. And it's how do you get past that first couple of weeks to then, oh, I actually like this place and these guys are actually helping me, rather than like, why the hell am I here, right? So let's break that down, and why don't we start with what are some of the most frequently asked questions that a family member will ask you who's considering putting their son or daughter into treatment?
That's an interesting question, because there is such a broad scope of questions that we get asked as admissions. But also, I just kind of want to comment on, like I said before, in my life, I was kind of put around recovery from a very young age. So like when I got to treatment at 37, you know, it really wasn't about, I mean, I learned a lot in treatment, but it was about like taking direction, listening to people, making my bed, being somewhere on time, you know, with an alarm clock, like getting the things back that I had gotten so out of the habit of doing. And that's what I kind of try to explain too to the families. And a lot of families, you know, they want to know about, you know, the comfort level, the how we help them as far as like emotionally, like with therapy and things like that. The one I do also do a family group on Thursdays, which it's mainly moms and some wives, which is interesting. But you know, we talk a lot in there about what for families, like what not to do. You know,
right.
You don't want to send them money in the first 30 days, and they ask like, well, how do they eat, and how do they do this, and how do they get what they want? And it's like they don't need any of that stuff in the first 30 days of treatment. But you know, so we talk about what not to do, and then how to like hold boundaries with a drug addict in active addiction. Like there's a saying in Al-Anon actually that's like, you can love your person to death.
Right.
So to love them from afar is way healthier, and it's gives them the best chance at staying clean and sober if you can detach yourself and let them get well on their own. So that's what I kind of try to talk to the parents about and the families about, to let the professionals take over for at least 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of dive into like, what is their, you know, patterns? What are they coming to treatment and then leaving 3 days later and then just, you know, coming just to get the heat off their back? Or, you know, what do they need to work? Do they have any trauma? Do they need therapy and other other areas of life? So, and then, yeah. So does that answer your question?
I mean, it's a good start. Yeah. It's a good start. I think, you know, so let's kind of break that down, right? Most frequently, do you feel that you're talking to the actual clients who are looking to get help versus the family members who are looking to get their kids into to treatment? Like, what percentage would you say you deal with the actual person looking for help versus family members of people looking for help?
I would say it's 50-50.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's good to know, because I think a lot of people assume that somebody who's actually in active addiction or alcoholism, they're not of the, you know, they don't have the mental capacity to kind of seek out and reach out for help. But that's not the case. They can. It's just, it's not the most coherent. Mm-hmm. You know, I think we all know that. Anyone watching who's, you know, been drinking and called a number they found online and they're like, hey, I need help, but then they don't even make sense half the time. But you got to know that the person on the other end of the line is listening, and they're there to help you, no matter how much of an obstruction you are to your own self, right? So you say about 50-50. And so how do you approach it differently? How do you approach the conversation with somebody who is drinking or doing drugs and they're high, but they're looking for help? And what's that process look like? Because I can't imagine it's, hey, you know, I need help, and then they come in. It's, you know, they might go dark for a few days. They might come back. So let's talk about that first. What does it look like when you're talking to somebody who's actually in the middle of it? And how do you help them navigate a path forward to getting help?
So I think the one thing that has been the key for me, you know, is to build rapport with that person, find out what they're struggling with, see if there's anything from my past that, you know, from my own experience, my experience and my past. And it sounds crazy, but like all the trauma and hurt and terrible things that happen, like I actually can use that today to help these people.
Right.
And so I try to build rapport with them and tell them, you know, that I understand, I've been there. And that has been like the best way to get connected with somebody that needs help. Like, listen, I get it. I've been there, and this is how I got out of it, you know?
Right.
And it can be done. And
it's
then
the connection and the relatability, and then the ability to just kind of speak their language.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And know like exactly how they're feeling physically, exactly what they're going through with families, you know,
Right.
and like there's no better tool in addiction than that, in my opinion, you know, just
Got it.
kind of like getting eye level and these people, whether or not they're high or drunk or, you know, whatever state they're in, they want somebody to hear them. And it's good to be that person that like doesn't have a dog in the fight. Like, you know, you're not the family, you're not the court, you're not the cops, you're not the, you know, spouse. You're
Right.
just somebody.
You're just there to help them
Yeah.
and get them through that situation.
Yep.
Okay, so when you do that, and then ultimately, you know, how how resistant is that person to actually getting help? You know, what are some of the common barriers that you see for somebody going through it who kind of deep down inside knows they need help, but they don't want to get help?
So the common barriers are, you know, it kind of depends on what kind of substance they're using. And also, you know, addiction doesn't discriminate. It can be a high-level, C-level employee, or it can be a 21-year-old that's burned everything to the ground that's sleeping under a bridge. So it's
Right.
like all walks of life, right? So if you have somebody that has a family and a job and still has both cars in the garage and kids, and so that you have to approach that differently. Like, okay, well, we can help you with FMLA, and we can help you with, you know, short-term, long-term disability. Like, what, you know, we have professionals that help with that. But now, if we're talking about an opiate addict that is walking the streets and is, you know, getting sick as soon as the opiates wear off, then it's like we go, okay, well, we can help you with that. You're going to be comfortable. We have a medical director. So it kind of depends on the demographic of who we're talking to as
Right.
to how you approach it.
Right.
Which, you know, at the end of the day, that any barrier that anybody can have can be overcome if you really want to get sober.
Right.
And because all of those things are like, you know, you can get through any barriers, in my opinion.
Right. No, I agree. I mean, I think any obstacle you can, you know, remove, but it's just a matter of, you know, your willingness to do that partially, and partially willing, you know, letting people help you. Right. And I think that's a big one. Okay. So then now you've talked to this person, you've helped them make the decision. They come to treatment, right? And usually if they're in active addiction, they need some form of detoxification. So they come to treatment, and how long before they want to leave?
Sometimes it's 1 hour, sometimes it's 1 day, usually about day 3, I'd say, is the hardest.
Right.
You know, again, it just kind of depends on what kind of client we're talking about, but I would say day 3 is the hardest. And day
Right.
3, day 4, you know, you've come in, you've kind of landed a little bit, you've gotten some hours of sleep and some food, and so yeah.
And why do they want to leave? Does it? I mean, I know why, you know, what I've seen, but just from your perspective, what voices are they hearing where they're like, you know, I want to leave treatment, even though 4 days ago they were, you know, not doing well, right? Like there's a reason they're there. What are the common causes of people wanting to leave treatment?
So I just, you know, I kind of want to dip into this a little bit because, you know, people that have problems with addiction have, it's, you know, it's the brain and the body. So it's like the obsession of the mind and the allergy of the body.
Right.
So you're, when somebody's wired like me, the brain, it's almost like, just to kind of put it in very simple, like my brain, even today, will try to lie to me and tell me, oh, you're not good enough. Oh, you're not going to do this. Oh, you need to do that. Oh, he doesn't like you. Oh, you know, and so in very early 1, 2, 3, 7 days sobriety, it's like, oh, if I leave treatment, I can, you know, go back to my job or go back to the girl or go back to the guy, or, you know, so the lies start happening very early on. And a lot of times you'll hear them say, I'm not even thinking about using. I don't want to get high.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go out there and do anything. I promise. I'm just going to go home. I'm just going to, just let me call whoever. And it's like, that's how cunning our disease is. And it is a disease that it's going to lie to you. And then you'll leave and outside the treatment center, it's like they're back in 3 hours because they got loaded across the street,
Right.
So,
right.
yeah.
And then that cycle repeats itself,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, so then what are some active, we call it ACA blocking, but it's basically, when somebody wants to leave treatment because the disease is calling and, they use whatever excuse under the sun, whether it's, this program's awful or, somebody's waiting for me at home or my job or what, there's always a different reason, but it always leads to them leaving against advice of the treatment team, using and then wanting to come back, right? And so what are some active tools that you use and the team uses to help prevent that so they don't actually leave and that they can recommit to their treatment and recovery?
Sometimes sometimes is harder than others, but again, to go there, sit with them, let's talk about where your mind's taking you. Let's talk about the things that are on the line if you leave treatment. Let's talk about, depending on whatever they have lost before they came to treatment or what they're up against losing. Let's talk about those things. Let's talk it out. Sometimes taking them for a walk, getting them out of the center just around the block, or taking them for ice cream, or, just sitting with them, listening to them, and them putting air to their reasoning for wanting to leave, that's very helpful for them. And just listen, this is what we talked about before you came in, wife or mom or kids or whoever is very supportive of you being here. So reminding them of their whys, why did you come here? Why did you make that first call? Why did you want to commit to this long? Or, and just actually listening to them and having them talk it out. Most of the time works, sometimes it doesn't, but for them to be able to feel heard and remind them of their life and what their goal is.
Right, right. I think that's so important, just to kind of remember why you're there and what's important, and whether it's they want to go back to a job or they want to go back and regain custody of their child, or, in addition to being sober, right? Because being sober is important for them, but there's always something that they've lost along the way that motivates that person to want to get better, right? And I think for you, I kind of want to loop back into your story here and interject, because we're talking about the clients, but when you were in that situation, what was the motivating factor for you that was driving you to even want to get better, even want to get sober rather than just giving up?
There was several things. I had felt, it almost was like when I first got to treatment, I felt like the damage was too far gone, and just thinking about trying to repair that seemed impossible, if not, just exhausting. And when I hung in there, and like I said, about the 2 or 3 week mark, when I had that conversation with my brother, and then, I was just like, okay, I'm going to give it, 10 more days, or I don't remember what my time limit in my head was, but I got a sponsor, called my sponsor every day, and just decided to take direction. Not just sometimes a minute at a time, 10 minutes at a time, an hour at a time. And things really started to get better for me. And two, my family was really important to me, and I knew that they didn't have anything to do with me before I came to treatment, but it would be a for sure deal breaker if I left. So having that kind of slowly trickle back into my life was really, really important to me, and just, like I said, after getting to those little milestones of recovery, and I was like, whoa, holy shit, I haven't thought about getting high today, and it's been a week since I've thought about it. And then, so just kind of the little wins is kind of what kept me going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that was you were building momentum, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as you build momentum, then everything started kind of falling in place, and it was the universe kind of working hand in hand with you, because you opened yourself up to receiving that love and support rather than having that boundary having that boundary and wall between you and everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I think one of the key, in AA or in your treatment program, one of the key things is that you're around other people who are also actively engaged in improving themselves, right? And in overcoming and dealing with all the pain and suffering that comes along with the addiction, right? Because once we start peeling back the layers of the addiction and, going through the withdrawal symptoms and kind of getting past that first 2-3 weeks, then it's all the mental health, whether it's the trauma or the anxiety or the depression, or there's a lot of other co-occurring diseases, and sometimes they become primary once you're further along in treatment. Sometimes they're still actively hand in hand with relapse prevention, and you really want to kind of look at it from every angle. So I think one thing I'd like to talk a little bit more about is aftercare, because now you've come to treatment, you've gotten through that first few days where you wanted to leave, you stuck it out, you got that 30-day program, 45-day program of residential detox residential services, and that's really the most intensive period where it's 24/7. But now you're ready to kind of step back into the environment, whether you go back home, whether you go to sober living. And so at that point it's like, okay, well, either you don't want to do treatment anymore, which you think, okay, well, what's the point? I've already done this. I'm sober. I'm just going to go to some meetings. Or you actually make a conscious decision that there's still more work to do. I want to deal with my anxiety. I want to deal with my depression. I want to deal with the trauma from my childhood. And that's where a lot of the heavier lifting comes in place when it comes to the mental health issues. And so I think that's where the aftercare program, and it really starts with more of an intensive outpatient program. Those programs are, as 9 hours a week. You have 3-4 days of group counseling, individual counseling, and then ultimately outpatient programming where, whether you do 1, 2, 3 sessions a week where you still get engaged or you still keep yourself engaged. And then, as you're familiar with, you spoke about AA, being active in meetings. And so I kind of want to touch on, because I think that there's a lot of historical, AA versus therapy or AA versus treatment, but I feel like we've moved past that. Mm-hmm. And we're in a phase now where whether you're in AA or whether you're in treatment, you kind of recognize and appreciate and respect the other. And I think what we've seen is that anyone who's come in with addiction and also has mental health issues, it's really a combination of being engaged in an active support group system where you can speak with other people who are going through it, and you guys can kind of keep yourselves accountable to each other and have those checks and balances, and people that you can reach out to when you're starting to get cravings, coupled with being in an aftercare program and having counselors and therapists and also being in groups with other people who are actively doing that, right? And so I think I personally cannot stress the importance of, or how important that is. And a lot of times people struggle with finding a really good aftercare program. In Ocean Rock, we have our virtual program because we recognized that a lot of people who come out of treatment, they want to go back to work, they want to go back to school, they want to get their life back together, but they want to have the connection they had built and the momentum that you just talked about, and they don't want to lose that. So what are, going back to you, you have seen a lot of people who have transitioned either out of inpatient residential treatment to outpatient, or who are looking to come directly into outpatient. And what are some of the big advantages that you've seen that the clients who've made that commitment to continue their recovery and continue their therapy, what do they get out of that?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I stayed in treatment 4 months collectively, detox through
Your last
IOP.
day, your last treatment, yeah.
And I would have stayed longer if my circumstances would have been different. But I always like to say that, you know, even when talking to families and clients, like, think of it like an insurance policy. And the longer you stay, the more you're putting towards insurance towards your sobriety. Because detox in residential is like this cocoon. It's easy to stay sober in there.
Right.
You have all these people around that are always checking on you, you know, groups, therapy, your peers,
yeah.
like, you know, it's easy.
Yeah.
You're highly monitored. You know, IOP's a little bit different. You're still monitored and checked on and have group and therapy and all that, but it's still, you're in a community that is structured. You know, that I don't know of any. We've had such good success with Ocean Rock. And I always kind of make a joke, like, if something good came out of COVID, it was that we learned how to communicate virtually.
Right.
And like, I think that's why we've had such success with our program in particular. But then when I like what you said about, you know, the finding other people to help. I can remember getting hired on as a support staff at, you know, 7 months sober, and thinking, gosh, like, this is a purpose for me.
Right.
You know, and whether it's talking to somebody about going to detox, or if they're just looking for IOP, or if they are a working professional that wants Ocean Rock, that thinks it's a good idea, like, that's what I love, is that, like, you know, they can still have that community and that structure and that therapy. And you're right, like, the therapists are wonderful and great, and everybody needs therapy, in my opinion, but, like, they can't go out and be your community like AA or NA or HA or whatever A that you attend, you know. But so I think, you know, it's just the more treatment and tools that you can put in your tool bag to prepare you for the rest of your journey,
right,
is better, you know.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think, you know, we say outpatient treatment, people are used to hearing the word outpatient kind of when it comes to going to you know, I went to outpatient, you know, whatever, some type of medical thing, right? But outpatient, when it comes to our type of program in our facilities, and in the mental health and addiction space, is really kind of a unique thing, because it's really, you boil it down, it's a combination of group and individual counseling, right? With the majority of group counseling. And so, you know, it's similar to, you know, being in a group setting with people who are similar to you and going through similar struggles, and kind of working through your issues together, right? And I think that's the biggest difference between just going to therapy, which is just one-on-one, which has extreme value, versus being in an outpatient program where, in addition to getting a one-on-one session and having the ability to kind of really go deep in that session, you also have these group sessions where you're with other people and you're getting help together. And it's not only what you're learning from your counselor, but it's what you're learning from each other, that I find significantly helpful, and what really differentiates kind of a program versus just individual therapy, right? And I think at the end of the day, individual therapy is really important, and it's something that we definitely recommend. And even when they're done with our program, we recommend them to stay doing that and you know, stay connected. But to me, I think I've found that a lot of the success, especially in that phase where you need as much support as possible, is having that group support and having the other people you're learning with and you're persevering through. Because what we know is this: we know that life is scary. You can get lonely, and a lot of times it's what you do when you're alone and when you're in your own head that leads to the negative and sometimes grave consequences. And it's the second that you open your mouth and you open your eyes and you connect with another person, where there's a hope that you're either not going to use, or if, you know, there's somebody knows where you are or what you're doing, and they can help you if even if you make the wrong decision, right? And I know I kind of want to touch on a story that you and it's not a story, it's a real event, but it's a story now that you would tell, because I know that you have chased people down who either left the program or who you knew personally, and you know, they ended up using, and if you hadn't been there and you hadn't brought them back to life, they wouldn't be here. So I'd like you to share one of those experiences with us, because to me that it digs deep. You know, it kind of just resonates not only with me but with everybody else, as far as how close and how quickly somebody can go from being alive and being around to being dead, and also how you could actually avoid that. And so, you know, I want everyone to listen to this, because, you know, I know, Camille, you've actually had several situations where you've brought people back to life and you've really saved lives. So I want to, maybe you can share one of those with us.
Yeah, so I'll just share the most recent, was over last month. Gosh, I guess a little over a month ago. And a young lady, you know, that is in the close to me, had left and gone and gotten high, and I didn't really realize at first that I thought that it was just meth, and I say just meth, that's terrible.
Right.
Meth is awful, and I was on it for a very long time, but we're not talking about fentanyl in my mind. So then I had gotten word that she was doing fentanyl, and so I stopped her out, you know, drove straight to the hotel, somehow talked my way into the front desk guy opening the door for me, and, you know, she was unresponsive. And so it would have been one more red light or one more argument from the front desk guy, or, you know, she wouldn't be here. Seconds. Yeah. She was, you know, the death rattle that you hear about, or, you know, most people don't hear that on a regular basis, but the death rattle that you hear about was happening, and she was gray, and so we were able to get her revived. And how'd you bring her back? I do carry Narcan with me, just because of the space, you know, our world.
Right.
But really, you know, people that work closely in the treatment industry, most of them carry Narcan, and so Narcan, and then CPR. My son happened to be with me; he did CPR, and then the paramedics got there pretty quickly and took her to the local hospital, and she recovered fully, but it was a very close call.
I mean, that's such a traumatic event, both for her, obviously, and but also for you. And even though you've been through these types of things so many times, I mean, what was going through your mind in that moment, and also afterwards, when you kind of had a chance to sit down and in a quiet space and kind of reflect on it?
You know, what I was thinking, honestly, was I'm going to have to call this girl's mom and tell her she's dead. You know, and this 20-year-old beautiful girl that is out here, families in Texas, and how am I going to do this? You know, and just shaking and scared. And, you know, it's interesting, and this has happened a few times, and I hear about it too. When an opiate addict overdoses, it's not traumatic to them. Right. They go to sleep and they wake up with everybody around freaking out, you know. So, and I witnessed that too, that specific time, and other times, like talking to people that have just been, you know, on life support after overdosing on fentanyl, and they're like, yeah, I mean, still thinking about getting high, you know, but everybody around is like, what is wrong with you? Like, you were blue and your lips were cold, and they don't remember it like that. Right. So while it's traumatizing, it's like you went to bed, you woke up, and you just went to sleep. Right. So it's an interesting perception that not a whole lot of people would think about, but I think about it all the time. Like these, you know, clients that we have that have overdosed 20, 30, 40 times, and it's not a big deal because they don't see it. You would think of it as a deterrent, but it's not, because they're not experiencing it the way that the people around them are experiencing it. Exactly. Right? But it is something that, you know, it's a story that I think as you tell it, you know, it resonates, because it's something that we hear all the time. You know, we hear overdose and deaths, and, you know, obviously we deal with it a lot in our space because,
we're in the field and we hear about, these things, but even just the general public, you hear on the news, whether it's a celebrity or whether it's a lot of times it's celebrities, but I think everyone just always scratches their head like, oh, this person had everything, like how could they, why, what's like, why would they use, or they had kids and they had a family. And it's, to me, the biggest irony, and this is whether I'm talking to you who was a mom and had kids, and obviously you don't want to use, but you were using and you lost all those things, and then you had to work on getting it back. Or I've talked to therapists, I've talked to people who are in the kind of the professional field of providing the care and the delivery of care, whether they're doctors or psychologists or therapists, and a lot of them are going through the same or similar issues, whether it's depression or anxiety, or at some point maybe they had addiction, they overcame it. So I think you hit the nail on the head earlier where you said this doesn't discriminate. Mm-hmm. You could be rich, you could be poor, you could be young, you could be old, you could be, have lots of degrees, you could have no degrees. I mean, it's not based on intellect.
And it's not a moral issue either.
Right.
It's not like I have I have depression or I have anxiety or I have, addiction because of my morals, because I was brought up, and raised like it's not a good, like bad people trying to get good. It's
right.
Sick people trying to get well. And
right.
That's how we need to kind of have the perception as in our space is like these people, this is not like a choice
right.
to have either mental health or addiction. It's a full on like, well, for addiction, it's a disease, and mental health as well. Like, you don't choose to, like, you don't say in the first grade, like, I want to grow up and have major depression. Like,
I think technically, based on all the books, now they've recognized that it's a disease and it's a disorder. And I think that's important. I think that's really important, because then you have the ability to utilize your insurance to, it's one of the essential benefits, so it's covered by insurance. You have, medical doctors, you have a lot of other things where it's being treated as not just some social model, it's also being combined with medication and combined with therapy and all of those things. So I think that's significant, but I think sometimes we get ahead of ourselves in focusing on labels. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that I've seen. It's like, yes, it is a disorder, it is a disease. There is still a willpower component. There is still how much effort are you willing to put into this and being actively engaged in the program. But the best way I can describe it from everything that I've seen and heard over the last 10 years is that you're trapped, mm-hmm. right? And that applies to addiction. It applies to mental health, whether it's depression or whatever. It's that you're trapped, right? And you're trapped with inside of yourself. And you're trying to find a way out, but you're surrounded by either thoughts or cravings that lead to negative consequence, right? And that negative consequence can be as bad as something that you cannot come back from, which is death through overdose or death through suicide, which as we know that both of those have risen significantly in the last decade. But in addition to that, it's how do you drag yourself out of this? And what I can tell you is that nobody can do it by themselves.
That's right.
That is a fact, right? It's you need help, and you need to be able to reach out for help. And then all the stuff that comes after that is incredibly important, and that's where the healing happens. But it's that instantaneous light bulb that switches where you actually allow someone else to help you, and then you have to do that every day after that, right? So that's the daily effort, because then you do it for a few days, now you want to leave, you want to shut people out, now you go back. So as long as you keep an open mind, and as long as you keep the lines of communication open, and allow people to help you, then that's how you get through the first phase. And then you've touched on this earlier, which is the next part of it is giving back, right? It's now you've gotten some tools, you have some sobriety, whether it's 30, 60, 90 days, and now you start, how can I help somebody else? How can I pay it forward. You could even be in treatment and this guy who just came in 3 days ago who wants to leave, and you say, hey bro, I was there a couple of weeks ago, and just be there for that person. And so it's something that to be of service and to be actively engaged in helping other people gives such great purpose to ourselves and to oneself that motivates you moving forward. For me personally, that's been the biggest motivator, is just how do we help people, and then how can I, whether it's through this podcast or through the program, be able to help somebody overcome something that's been that they haven't been able to overcome before. And it's not without somebody like you and somebody like the other great members of our team who actually make that happen, right? Because it's one thing to talk about it, it's one thing to put it all together, that's important, but it's the people who day in and day out are working with the clients, working with the families. It's exhausting, and I want you to tell us a little bit about that, because I think a lot of people assume that somebody in your position, you help people come in and you kind of, wash your hands of it and you move on to the next person. But I know you specifically, and I can't talk about everybody, but I know you specifically, and a lot of people who work for us have the mindset where they not only want to help somebody get the help that they need, but they want to stay connected to that person and to that family for as long as it takes. But how do you do that? Because that seems like it just takes so much out of you.
It's important for me because, number one, like I said earlier about connecting with somebody on the front end, a lot of drug addicts that, you have it, or I'll just talk for myself. I had it in my mind that like nobody understood. This is just, I'm so much different, and, and nobody knows this pain. But like once you introduce somebody to a community of people that have had the same pain, like that's a bond,
Right.
And I talked earlier about, the executive or the, person on the street. It's like you can be, the person that looks like they have it all together and just kind of, still have all the things in life, or, talk to that person and then talk to like the person that's been homeless for 6 months and they describe the same pain in here.
Right.
So like to be able to introduce somebody that's calling me wanting help and thinking that nobody understands and they'll never find anybody that's gone through anything like that, but to introduce them to a community of people that can and will and support them. And the same with the families. Like, I talk to moms, this particular, I know I keep going back to the moms, but the moms are, usually the most involved. Dads are too, and so are spouses. But, these moms that have these kids in treatment, and like say, there's one in particular right now that it's in my mind that her son's been in treatment for a long time, a year and a half or something like that, in and out, in and out, in and out. And she's never talked about it to anybody. She goes to work, she has 2 other kids, and like nobody, she feels like she can't talk to anybody. So to be able to just release that to somebody like myself or anybody else that works for here or on my family group, or, connect with the other moms, it's so beautiful to watch. And I like to stay connected because, it's a beautiful thing to watch the light come on in somebody's eyes. There's also a very traumatic side to this industry, which we both know.
Right.
Sometimes it doesn't end well,
Right.
And that is it's a hard pill to swallow. But like to be able to see the journey, and then also be somebody that if they do slip and fall and need help again, like I want to stay connected so they can call me and like
they feel comfortable.
Yeah. Like let me help you. And also like it's very, very normal for people to for relapse to be part of the story. It was
Right.
for me, it was for most people I know. So like it's not really for people like us how many times you fall, it's how many times you get back up and shake it off and keep trudging.
Right.
And have people that are there to not kick you while you're down. We don't shoot our wounded. We're going to be there with our hands held out to like pick you back up and walk with you, So That's kind of my mindset on it. I love the families. I love the clients. I have clients that call me from 2016, 2017, you know, that are still doing good and like
Right.
live on the East Coast and have their families back. And like, that's just, you can't put a price tag on that, you know?
No, that's the beautiful part of it. It's, you know, no matter how much stress goes into this job and how much effort and how much, you know, you lose sleep and just kind of at the end of the day, you're exhausted. And then you have to wake up and do it again, is you get that one letter from a family member, from a former client who says thank you and just shares a little bit about how cool their life is now and how much, you know, they appreciate what you did and how great things are. And that one letter by itself motivates you as a staff member and as somebody who's on the other end to try to help people to kind of move forward. And it's also that letter and kind of those success stories that helps you be of the mindset where, hey, I want to, you know, even if somebody leaves the program or even if somebody sometimes is difficult while they're in the program, you want to give them another chance because they're so used to being that way and then getting rejected that they're all, I don't know if it's subconscious or not, but they're almost testing you to see, okay, well, I'm going to push you to the edge where normally people would kick me out. And then what are you guys going to do? And I think that's really a big distinguishment between what we can do as a facility and as a program in that situation versus what a family member should do in that situation, right? Because you spoke about earlier your story and it's, okay, you were pushing, and then the family was like, well, let's still help, right? Here's $20, here's a ride. And that didn't get you to where you needed to be. And it was when they completely kind of cut you off and you were at that rock bottom where you started making the effort. Because you got to make the effort yourself. Like you got to meet somebody at least halfway, right? And I think that's the key is you got to, you know, once you see them taking half the step or going halfway, then that's where the family can meet you along the road, right? And then you do it together, right? And I think that doing it together is important. And that's why your family group's so important, is because you are now talking to the families and, you know, you've gotten the clients to the point where they've opened up to the fact that they want their family involved. So it allows you, you know, there's HIPAA, there's a lot of things where unless the client actually allows you, you can't do some of those things. So, but to me, that's where everything kind of comes full circle, because you got through the barrier, they got in the door. They wanted to leave, they stayed, or they came back. They're getting the help, they're getting their therapy, they're getting their case management. Now they want to start talking to the family again. The family wants to start talking to them again. Now your family group kicks in, and I want to learn more about your family group. But that's where it kicks in, and it's, to me, that's kind of the most important part of the sustainable recovery, is when you are also, not just you, but, you know, our therapists, we have family sessions, working on the family, because the family needs to get help and the client needs to get help. And then when you reconnect them, you can't reconnect them unless you've worked on both sides,
Right.
and you've worked on it as a team and as a group. So can you highlight a little bit about what goes on both in your family sessions and in your awareness of our, you know, family sessions that we do as a program, to then reconnect families together, people who have lost hope maybe a month ago, who are now seeing some light at the end of the tunnel? And what are the things that we do to increase that bond and the reconnection there?
So with, you know, I think family therapy is important, and you know, addiction touches everybody involved, right? So even if they have been estranged from their loved one for a long time, they're still hurting. And so, you know, with my family group, when I first started doing it, I thought, gosh, I don't know, like, what am I doing? Like, am I going to be helping? And it's been such a beautiful thing. Again, there's HIPAA. We don't talk about, you know, people with their name. Like, I don't speak names. I don't talk about their treatment. I don't talk about, you know, things with the clients. But what's beautiful about it is these people also, just like the clients, these family members that have a space to be able to go, gosh, like, I'm not the only one, you know?
Right.
This other lady is over here bawling her eyes out. And so what I try to encourage is hope. You know, if your loved one is still breathing, there's hope. boundaries to hold, like let's talk about what to do and what not to do. And then also to encourage each other, because like most of them are kind of in the same, time frame together, their loved ones in treatment, but there also is people that have called on the 800 number that I've never even met their son or daughter, and they attend the family group because it's, I want to help everybody that I can.
Right. It's open to everybody.
It's open to everybody. And so it's a beautiful thing for family members. Like I said, that mom a while ago that I was thinking of that has said, I've never talked about this to anyone. I just go to, nobody at work knows, nobody in my social life knows, and to come on for the first time and just cry and spill her guts and like have the other family members support her and just like, gosh, thank you so much. I don't feel so alone. It's just like beautiful, and amazing. And it's been really rewarding for me, and I think for them too. So.
Yeah, no, that's a great space that you've created. And I think that, it kind of brings everything full circle to kind of hear their perspective and have them have the support of each other. I've really enjoyed speaking with you, Camille.
Me too.
I love you. And I feel like you are, anyone who knows us knows this, but I feel like you are one of the most not only passionate people when it comes to helping others, but you have such a beautiful heart. You never give up. You don't give up for yourself. You don't give up for the clients. You'll do whatever it takes to help them, get out of their own way. And now with the family group, you're helping connect the families. And so, I feel privileged to have you as part of the team.
I appreciate that.
And I think that the clients and the families are really lucky to have you as part of the program. So I just wanted to thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
For those of you who are watching, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Ocean Rockstars Podcast. We have our Instagram page, Ocean Rockstars. We're on other social media as well. And the more that you watch and the more that you learn, the more reward that we feel, because ultimately we're doing this in order to share as much information as we can and share our experiences, and then for you guys to be able to reach out if you need any more information or help from anyone on our team. So again, I wanted to thank you, and I
Thanks for having me.
wish you the best going
Thank
forward.
you.
Okay.
All right.